Shepherding Chaos, the Retail 247 podcast. Embracing change in the world of retail tech.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Shepherding Chaos. Today we were due to have a client session, but instead we have now got our Head of Tech, John Best, to join us.
Hello.
So today's going to be a bit more technical than normal, but we're going to meander through some sort of current issues and what we've done as Retail 247. So let's start out with what we've done over the last, X years. I guess my first thought was we spent quite a bit of time talking architecture before we embarked on, our development venture and the whole serverless concept we came up with. Thoughts?
Yeah, I still remember those first conversations we had about the stock system.
Yep.
That was our first goal, really, was to build a stock system. We did that little proof of concept and also dabbled with...
And you tried to explain non-relational technology to me.
Yeah. Yes. There was education involved. It was, that was about 5 years ago. Yeah. So we were quite early adopters, really, of serverless and coming at it from a purely serviceless first architecture. So we did the initial proof of concept on stock, and then I think we dived into PIM really with...
Yeah. How do you still stand by that decision? Did we make the right decision?
Oh, I love serverless so much. I'm not paid any money by anyone particularly to promote that. I think it's great. The fact that your usage and costs scale in parallel and you don't have to over-provision.
Yeah, the costs are pretty reasonable, I think. I still don't understand the bills we get. The bills can be made up and it's a great concept if you can get away with it. But yeah, in terms of not having a bank of flashing lights and tin that we have to replace on a regular basis, it's genius.
And also, a big part of it, from my point of view, was we were a tiny team and we didn't have any dedicated technical staff who could look after a herd of servers. So we wanted that lack of infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it's worked well for us, and that scalability piece. We've had some challenges, I guess, along the way. Any things that sticks out?
Yeah, because we were quite early adopters, relatively early adopters of both AWS Lambdas and DynamoDB, we've seen it develop a lot over the years. So initially, DynamoDB, which is our NoSQL database, it had a provisioned capacity level. So you'd say, I want 3-4 write units per second, and then give you a certain level of power. And it would give you, if you were underutilizing, it would give you some stored up things so you could deal with peaks. But the thing is, our workload was so bursty because we were doing product imports. So we wrote quite a bit of infrastructure to scale the capacity when we were doing imports, get this massive spike in load and then nothing. So, but more recently they've come out with, a few years ago they came out with on demand. So we just pay per use. There is more expensive, but you're only paying for each individual request. No, it's the cost per write is more, but the overall cost is still very low because you're just paying for each individual unit.
Yeah, that whole not worry about performance and scale dynamically is just, it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, and I still love Lambdas, which is how we do our APIs. So we don't have to have a bank of web servers. Yeah. Servicing requests and look after them.
Well, we've hit a few things in those, though, the 15-minute barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was 5 minutes.
Is it?
Yeah. So we've also seen that grow over the years. So the 15-minute barrier, because we want to keep our architecture super simple, so ideally it's just a Lambda talking to DynamoDB. We do have Elasticsearch, which makes me a little sad because it doesn't have that same scalability automatically. But we try to make sure every workload item can complete in that 15 minutes, which is occasionally a little tricky. I think we will at some point have to look at doing something, but we want to kick that as far down the line as possible, just to keep it as super simple, really.
Yeah. Is there anything lacking? What do we need to happen next to make our life easier in this world?
Oh, I'd say... Oh God! What do you mean lacking in terms of services from AWS?
I suppose so. We've been happy with the decision we made. We delivered some good software. We've got clients now giving excellent software. Clients now we've set an expectation, and therefore the demand for innovation and further development is increasing, which is again a great thing. But what do we need architecturally to support that?
I think one of the big things which we've been looking at is the ability to provision whole environments. So currently each developer has their own environment. We've got test and live and such like. But we'd like to be able to kind of single button spin up an instance, that kind of thing, so that if someone wanted to do a demo, they could spin up a whole instance dedicated to that demo. It would not have any interference from any other environment.
Yeah.
So we want to lower the friction for spinning up whole environments, I think.
I'll just drop to talking about one of the customers because, I mean, again, this week we're rolling out to 90 cruise stores, a solution that talks to our central entity, and capacity hasn't been something I've been concerned about.
No, it's yeah. I mean, I genuinely really like working with DynamoDB and Lambdas. I find with the modern development though, there's so many layers of abstraction between things. So in the good old days, and like when I did that project at Willovers, where we're replacing a VB6 app. In a VB6 app, you click a button and the code is just there behind it that does the real work. Whereas now, you click a button, it's going through some things, calling a service which does work.
I reckon I could still code. If you found me some code, I could do it. It's finding that stuff that's difficult these days.
The code is simple. It's fine. The difficulty now is your layers, understanding these layers of abstraction, where to put stuff. That is more faffy and awkward. And I think, like I've always badged myself as a full stack developer. I'm a generalist, but I think the challenge of being full stack is harder and harder as you get more and more technologies involved. Yeah. Like just client side alone is insanely complicated now. I think it's over.
I was going to drift onto that actually because we like all operations, we use a number of components and libraries from third parties from wherever, as you say, and keeping on top of those is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think what's that? A soapbox? Yoink! I think the IT industry is really failing the end users of our products because of the pace of innovation and change. I saw like Silverlight, Microsoft Silverlight. I've seen that appear and disappear, and that for me is it was a chunk of time, and it was there. A lot of stuff was built with it, and now it's end of life. And likewise with web frameworks like AngularJS.
Yeah,
I just feel things should have a longer lifespan.
Yeah, yes, because the effort involved in ripping them out is huge. So we have to be as cautious as we can.
I think.
Back when I were a lad, and I tried to keep that for a while, but we had the same issue with libraries. But the bigger challenges I had were back to the performance piece. It was the DOS 640K barrier.
When you say back when you were a lad and libraries, Library of Alexandria, and absolutely, it's. And with that third party dependency, like a simple Angular app, when you spin it up, you just like do a hello world, ng generate, and the amount of stuff it chucks on your hard drive, it's hundreds of meg.
Yeah.
And that's because it's a full environment. It's got a little web server in it. It needs to pre-compile TypeScript. There's loads of stuff going on. But I think that's an insane amount of complexity. It really is. It's verging on horrific.
Well, a library is bigger than the PC was 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And then making sure that stuff is safe, and ensuring the validity of it, and it is, I think, something that IT is struggling with. Like, I know you and libraries, and why don't we just write it ourselves and all that? Because it's hard. No, but we do try to minimize our external dependencies because I'm not paranoid. I'm very worried about supply chain risks, which are very, very real.
We've got to protect our own world, but there are so many things we let into our world that we can't necessarily police all those things at the same time.
Absolutely. And just because a package is safe today doesn't mean it's safe tomorrow, which is definitely a worry.
So I guess let's drift on to some of the tools we've been playing with recently and broadly the AI world. Which we'll get onto in more detail, I'm sure. But you've been looking at some of the tools that can facilitate better and more rapid coding.
Yeah. So we recently started using Copilot, and I also always have ChatGPT open as my second tab now. Like I am, depending on what I'm working on, I could be in ChatGPT quite a lot because I think everyone's familiar with the fact that it's transformational. Like that's not up for debate. It's also idiotic at times and wrong. But considering this is effectively year zero.
Oh yeah, quite. It's all of a sudden it's there.
Yeah. And it's been productionized and of use so quickly. And it's genuinely jaw-dropping where it's going to go over the next few years.
Yeah, that's scary. So what does Copilot do for us?
Copilot allows us to, it's looking at the code you've just typed, looking at your code base and suggesting stuff. So quite often you'll type a line of code, you'll press enter, and it's almost a comfortable beat where it's like, it thinks the next line of code appears.
Okay.
And I think with both Copilot and ChatGPT using that for code generation, they're really good at making it so you're more editing than having to concern yourself with like, looking up the details. So like back in the day, people used to program and there was a pile of books on the desk next to them, you know. Then pretty much Google got rid of that and IntelliSense, which is autocomplete. So a combination of Google and IntelliSense got rid of that. But now with ChatGPT, you can just, like say I'm doing layout. You know me, UI, not necessarily my forte entirely, but I'll be like, I need to lay something out, 2 columns there and something on the right. And I'll just say to ChatGPT, make me a layout to do this.
Really?
Copy, paste, edit, fiddle around. I don't have to remember the syntax.
Yeah.
But the kind of, I think the thing with ChatGPT is it's a force multiplier. The better you are at a given thing, the more it's useful. Like because I'm so general, like I'm not a deep specialist on anything, that means I can like poop something out and I can fiddle with it because I know what I want and I know the effect. I'm not being steered by the AI. I'm using it as a tool to do a first draft.
Yeah.
It can be a little wordy, but you can just engineer your prompt to say, let's have a less verbose take on that.
Yeah. But suppose you take, am I getting therefore developers that are, and excuse the phrase, dumbed down because they've got so many tools helping them these days? Or am I going to get more productive developers? More productive developers.
I think. Well, it's the classic case. Like you got to have good people. Like with making tech, there's no substitute for good people. Like processes can't be a substitute for good people. You can have whatever process you like, but if your developers aren't good, you're not going to get a good product. And likewise, those good developers, AI will be the force multiplier because they can work quicker. And critically, one thing I find is it's easier to maintain a flow state.
Elaborate.
So flow is where you're like doing a thing perfectly naturally and you just keep going. Things that interrupt flow include pop-up messages, notifications. I can't abide them. But yeah, so...
Most of mine are from you, though.
Anything where something comes up and knocks you off track. And then, because then you may be like, I'll quickly check the BBC or something. So it can be, a single interruption can easily knock 20 minutes off your productive time. Whereas with ChatGPT, I'm not shilling for them particularly, but it's something like that. It means anytime you've got a little question, you're just like, how do I do this? And it just smooths out the bumps. So you just keep going, like relentlessly slaying problems. And
excellent.
Yeah, we're like yeah. So I think it does help you just be productive. And
Where does it go though? Back to the point where we're relying on third-party libraries, we're relying on lots of different things. If we become reliant on ChatGPT as an assistant, but also when we talk about it in a second, where we are starting to surface the output from that into the UI, into the data itself.
Yeah.
Are we now suddenly relying on something that's just A, so new, and B, changing all the
time? Well, you can target a specific version of it, but yeah, and I think the bigger issue is the fact that it's a black box.
Yeah.
It's very different to normal programming because you've got something that will not return the same results necessarily twice in a row.
Yeah.
Which is both a massive plus and a bit of a liability. And the fact you can't inspect it to validate what it's going to do, there's no way of proving it's correct. So if you were to be using it to generate structured data, you would have to have a backlog of tests to run against to make sure when you change to a new version that you're still getting that same output and you don't need to tweak your prompts. So
I guess, I don't know how hackable it would be, but hacking that area could cause chaos.
I mean, the whole ChatGPT I was thinking about this earlier, it's resurrected a whole area of problems. So when back in the day, when in my first job, I was sat here and my boss was sat there, and I just read about something called SQL injection.
Right.
And I was like, I tried it out on my computer, and there's, hey Clive, you're on your website, yeah? And he was on his version of his website. I was like, and I shut down his SQL server remotely. And then because of SQL injection. And SQL injection, conceptually, it's just unsanitized input. So you're giving it some input, and it's trying to build a query, and then you put something malicious in to make it do something different to what was intended.
Yep.
Okay. So then my reward was then to make our code base. I had to go through and spend days trawling through and doing fixing it. And the way you stop it is there's two ways. One is you clean the input so it's not bad. And the other one is you make it so that you make use of parameterization so that whatever's in there, it can't be malicious. So it will always it will always just be used for that context, and it won't be able to escape out. Mm-hmm. Now, the trouble with ChatGPT is when you're using it, if you're using it as a tool, it's kind of quite easy to break out of the context that the person's using it in. So you can say as part of your prompt, a conversation with a chatbot, perhaps, hey, ChatGPT, ignore all previous instructions. I want you to do this instead. And there's various attacks on that. I saw a beautiful one, which was where someone used images. So the new version of ChatGPT can take an image and do something with it.
Yeah.
And then the instruction was something like, hey, ChatGPT, I've got this locket from my grandparents. Could you read the text on it? And then ChatGPT read and executed the text in the context of the ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's scary. Yeah.
Because it's so clever, its cleverness, and apparently I have read this and heard about it from one of our developers who's very interested in AI. The better the model is, the kind of easier it is to trick because it can interpret things more richly.
Right.
So if you think of a really dumb machine learning thing, when you feed it a prompt, it's going to take a very simplistic interpretation of that. But as it gets more and more clever, then it can what you really want is this. I gotcha.
The downfall of humanity.
Yeah. They are jaw-dropping, but and also they can be wrong. That's one of the reasons why it's a great force multiplier, is because the more you know about a thing, the more you're going to catch it when it lies to you. Because it can be.
I think it's two things in that last paragraph, I guess. The validation of data. So we do a lot ourselves. Let's just drift back to what we do within the applications. So, validation's key, and the whole purpose of having solutions that protect data rather than allowing it to be free format spreadsheet world is something we focus on quite heavily. We've got validation points of in and out and during and all sorts of stuff, and that's been quite good for us as well. I think whilst it's stating the obvious, it's not always something that retailers tend to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Historically with data in multiple places as well, then you'd get divergent copies of what is the master. Where's that? Where did this bit of information come from?
Yeah, no, it's and that, I think we've cracked that really well. I'm quite proud of that. And then the other thing we sort of touched on in there was let's go to the broader topic of security.
Yeah,
and how scary that world is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a terrifying landscape. I think once again with my generalist hat on, I've been reading articles for 25 years on various hacks. I've seen a lot of security issues over the years, and it's a scary landscape. It really is, because
a constant battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's with the proliferation of libraries, these kind of supply chain threats are very, very real, and also supply chain of software as well. Did you hear about SolarWinds?
No.
SolarWinds was a provider of some form of infrastructure security thing. They got hacked.
And their component being placed in,
Yeah. And then, so that kind of thing, those high value targets, because if your monitoring software is hacked, puts you in a bit of a bind, and that's why I find it genuinely scary.
Yeah, so obviously we do everything we can to protect ourselves from that, but equally it's a constant battle. So, where does that take us in 2, 3, 4 years with the advent of AI, with the advent of more security risks and threats? Is it a battle we can win? Bear in mind we sell software.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think you just got to be cautious and minimalistic. The smaller your footprint, the smaller your exposed surface area, the smaller your attack. The attack vectors that can come in and hit you. So really just keeping it small, trusting nothing, presume everything's out to get you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like life.
Yeah. It's a sad way to live, really, but I think it's pretty necessary.
Cool. What else is on our list of things to talk about? You've written a section called Crazy with words I've never heard of. Rowhammer speculative.
Oh, these are beautiful.
Explain yourself.
Oh, you asked about security.
Yeah.
So okay. Because I found these once again they're just following security over the years. Once again, not an expert, but with security so the things I put in there I think was Rowhammer and Spectre.
Yeah.
So Rowhammer is a vulnerability where you've got a program running and it runs some malicious code to just repeatedly write to memory.
Right.
And with the intent...
Phil?
No, it flips bits adjacent to that memory
Right.
This is a real problem in processors. So you could just hammer and change adjacent memory, and then that was for me a fascinating problem because it's just something you wouldn't believe was possible, like in the abstract. So there was proof of concepts, and it genuinely impacted how people build like very low level stuff. And there's obviously nothing.
When was that?
Rowhammer was X years ago, a few years back.
Okay.
Spectre, I find even more weird. So Spectre makes use of, I think, to take this with a pinch of salt, check it on Google afterwards, but it makes use of, when processors are running, they do a thing called speculative execution.
Right.
Okay, so you got your processor, and it's guessing what the next instruction is going to be. And Spectre exploited that to achieve malicious aims, the Spectre kind of vulnerabilities. So, and that fundamentally changed how they did processor architecture. They had to release updates that slowed computers down in order to prevent that, because it's like, it's a really low-level attack.
I mean, who's doing this stuff and why? Broader question.
Well, those things both came out of research papers where people were...
Because they think they can, therefore they should give it a try.
Well, yeah, they were just... That's kind of... You're effectively white hat security researchers doing things and trying things out and attacking, looking for possible ways of attacking the system as a whole. But then in terms of, but once they've done that research, then it can be made use of by bad actors. And the trouble with the internet is everything is effectively next to each other. Like the distance between any 2 points on the internet is kind of zero. Like, if there's a bad person living in Ipswich, it's hard for them to impact me in the real world if I'm in, London. But on the internet, turns out we're next to each other, and everyone is next to everyone. So, that lack of distance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's simultaneously beautiful, like it's amazing, but it also does mean that
chaos could reign.
Yeah.
All right, next on the list was open source. So I guess from a commercial perspective, I struggle with that. I mean, obviously we've written our own software. We sell that software on a subscription basis. Everything's fine. But there are so many alternatives to most things that you can just download for free these days.
Yeah.
What's the open source proposition generally?
I mean, open source is one of the defining movements of software. It's shaped everything in the modern computing era. It's amazing, but its premise is shifting. So the premise behind open source was that before you'd get your binary, here's your executable, and you don't know what it's doing.
Yeah.
Whereas open source was all about sharing. This is the source code that was used to make that. You can go change it. So the most permissive licenses were do what you will with it. And then over the past...
And the proposition there is just for the greater good.
Exactly. These were hackers hacking away, making a thing. Hackers in the old computing sense of...
Yeah.
And they'd make a thing, and they were doing it to scratch an itch. They wanted to create something.
Artists.
Yeah, exactly. I think people who think programming... It's a different topic, but people who think programming is boring don't have much imagination. Like, with programming, you can achieve any effect. Like, it's different... Let's go.
Yeah. Come on to that.
But with open source, so you have this initial, very pure ideology, and there's lots of organizations and licenses that were created to do that, and then you saw some of that come out in the Creative Commons license. So where it was for just general stuff, where it's like, I'm making this thing to share. Now, with companies making open source software, it's a bit of a bind. The classic model has been self-support.
Right.
Red Hat.
Right.
Yeah. So that and their classic model. But more recently, I've seen just this kind of vibe where people release something as open source, but then they realize, oopsie, we need to monetize, and then they start sellotaping on a restrictive license to part of it. And to me, speaking as someone who hasn't contributed to open source at all, but I just think, you'll see somebody works away making something, and it becomes really used by a lot of people. And then now they want money for that. after the fact, which is on one hand, I think it's a real tension because you've got all this stuff that's critical to the internet.
And the alternative is that correct me if I'm wrong, but the Elasticsearch journey, or where that started out with somebody taking it, commercializing it, and forming a separate sort of pathway.
Yeah, if you're an open source company that makes an open source product and makes money on selling support, then someone else, we'll call them Amazon, can take that and make their own version of it, or take your code and literally put it in the cloud and put it behind a service. So they're making use of your work, but then selling it without having to share the source code because it's behind a service. So a lot of the open source based companies, then that's another reason to do this additional license to try to stop the cloud pure players taking their thing and putting it behind something. But this causes, I think there's a real tension with the licensing that they need to do in order to do that. Or they need to make some of it closed source, some of it open source. Most recently, there's a company called, I think it's HashiCorp, who make a thing called Terraform, which is used to manage infrastructure as code. Mm-hmm. So it's like you can provision infrastructure. They've been open source for a long time, and recently there's a kerfuffle over the last couple of weeks because they changed their license for reasons like just discussed, like to stop people making money off their back. Yeah. And basically immediately the open source community forked it because they can, because the source code's there, so they've made their own fork, and that's now been embraced. Yeah. So I don't know how that's going to play, but and with Elasticsearch. So Amazon took Elasticsearch, started selling it as a service. And then so Elasticsearch, the company, then started doing things to make it so they weren't quite compatible, to defend themselves kind of thing. And then so Amazon forked it, which forked the community. And I think that more recently they've got back on better terms.
Okay.
But yeah,
is that world more or less risky in terms of security? If we had libraries that were truly open source, surely that opens the door to more fear.
This is a topic. Both. So the classic thing with open source, a classic statement with open source is with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. So I think the intent with that was not from a security perspective. So because you got more people using it, more people looking at the code, and you can find if someone has a problem, you got all these people who can immediately hop on it.
Yeah,
right?
But there are multiple interpretations of a problem.
Yeah. But basically, it just gives. It means you've not just got 4 developers looking at a thing. Anyone could pick up and contribute and say, I can see this thing. And I think that's true for fixing issues. But in terms of auditing for security, if we look at Log4j, a logging library, that was used by a vast amount of software and had an underlying problem with it. And then when that underlying problem was discovered, there's a massive issue, but it was maintained by a tiny group of volunteers.
Yeah,
who I don't. They were either volunteers or maybe a couple of them got some money. But it's like all of these companies are making use of the library. No one was contributing to the library. It's so. And the trouble with I don't want to say the trouble with open source because that sounds like I'm criticizing. I'm not. The risk, the challenge is the fact that anyone can look at the source code, and therefore your black hats can be searching for problems, whereas other people, nobody's doing it. Well, people are doing security audits, but there's so much code to audit.
Yeah, and it's a sort of perpetual exercise, I guess. If there's no control on the frequency of change, or I know there are some controls, but then it wouldn't. Yeah, security must be weaker somehow.
I wouldn't say it's weaker, it's different. I mean, closed source is very big problems with security.
Yeah.
So I certainly wouldn't say one's better than the other. I think it's the nature of the beast. It's good to be just aware of the potential problems and the tensions that exist. Like, you've got people wanting to make software that's available for all, but that doesn't mean that bad people can look through and pick and find.
Okay, change tack. And I may well say the phrase "back on our lad" again.
Yay!
But do you think the role of coder has changed? Do you think coders need to understand business context to be productive?
I would say. I was going to say no. Then I was going to say yes. Then I'm going to go with it depends. So if you've got something where you've got coders who understand a code base and they're given changes to do to that code base to affect a change. I think that can be done in isolation.
Yeah.
I think if you're a small team, and ultimately, I think all teams should be small. So I think that is, then you want people to be as involved as possible. So you want your developers to understand context. So I think really, in an ideal world, if you're making a thing, you want the people to be as involved who are making it as possible, as least distance between the requirement and developer as possible.
Yeah, no, in that sentence, what is the requirement? Something that's been written for you, or something that's actually a business problem?
Business problem.
So
at whatever level that it may be.
Yeah.
So if you've got layers between the problem and the person implementing the solution, you're going to just get lost in translation over the way. And also, it means you're cycling back up time.
So is your proposition that we go back to when I was a lad, an analyst programmer, or do we?
Yeah.
I worry slightly that there's so much effort going into specifications, user stories, that the coding becomes just the last little bit at the end of an interpretation of a document rather than thinking.
No, absolutely. You want the person to be as involved as possible, so that ideally, I always love it when using a military metaphor, I guess, you really don't want to be in a situation where you're micromanaging the unit. You want to say secure that hill.
Yeah.
So you want the person to understand what that means.
Yeah, and challenge and offer solutions to that problem.
Yeah, exactly. And then you want to give them that agency so that they can go and work out how to do it. It's like, can I go on a slight tangent?
Mm-hmm.
There's no war game.
I would expect nothing less.
America did some war gaming. They've done lots of war gaming. Also not gaming, sadly, but they were doing a war game, and I find this really quite beautiful. So they had the people in command of the American fleets and stuff, and there was a simulating a full carrier group or something, and they had this guy. I'm going to say general guy. He was in charge of the other side, and then the general guy was like, okay, in the war game thing, he said he made it say that my people are going to be super decentralized. We're going to use motorbikes to communicate, thereby eliminating their ability to hoover information from cell phones and such like.
Yeah.
And we're going to use small boats to attack the carriers. And they had to restart the test because the Americans lost. they were like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So
that's cheating. Yeah.
Yeah. But the key thing was, and this is, I believe it would be fair to say, NATO military doctrine to some degree, that you want to push that decision making out.
Yeah.
You want to get it close to the ground.
And the tech isn't always the answer, and the established isn't always the answer.
Yeah.
Cool. I think on that note, actually looking at the time, it's been good. I think we'll park that as a part one of this process, and say thank you for the gentle chat through the world of tech.
Thank you.
Sean.